Good afternoon. I'm Chris Cruz Kalari, and this assignment was particularly valuable to me in a couple of ways. The first of which was, of course, to learn more about the Carnegie classification system and how schools are connected in that way. But the second way it was valuable to me was that it gave me a chance to sort of reflect on my values as an educator, to really think about the kinds of institutions that I would like to work in, the kinds of students I would like to serve. So I really reflected on my values, and I think that that will serve as a helpful context as I learn some of the other material in the class, and it will help me to think about how some of those ideas for the rest of the course could play out in the kinds of institutions that I would like to work. So the school I chose for this assignment initially was Bloomfield College in Bloomfield, New Jersey. And just as a little aside about Bloomfield, it's a small liberal arts college serving students who one might say are marginally prepared for college, may come from a community with a greater socioeconomic need than is average for many students at other New Jersey four-year colleges. Students may have gone to less competitive high schools, and the college really aims to provide a solidly transformative experience for students in a highly supportive atmosphere, with the idea that students will ultimately reach their first of all graduation goal, but of course then employment goal and possible goal for graduate study. So the two characteristics that I honed in on in terms of the Carnegie classification are, first of all, Bloomfield's inclusivity. So inclusive was one characteristic. The second was very high, mostly undergraduate. So I looked at those two characteristics, and that led me to another school that was very similar in terms of its inclusivity and very high undergraduate. And incidentally, sort of as a third characteristic that wasn't necessarily the initial driver, but small in size. So both institutions are small in size, and that second institution is Elizabeth City State University in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. And again, the institutions are serving students who again may be considered marginally prepared, and may have greater socioeconomic need than many schools, than many four-year schools in the same state. And when I think about how I would use the two characteristics, the two driving characteristics for this assignment, that is inclusivity and mostly high or mostly undergraduate, very high undergraduate, I think that I would be looking for the institution's ability to first obviously enroll students who are marginally prepared. So first, how does it go about recruiting those students and doing so ethically? And then from there, its ability to transform the students to be able to persist, graduate, and again meet their goals as far as employment and possible graduate school. So in that way, I think these two institutions are really having to prove that they are more effective than so many four-year schools, in the sense that students are essentially required, if they're going to meet that goal toward graduation, if they're going to be viable in the workplace in their field, if they're going to be viable in graduate study thereafter, the students are going to have to make a greater transformation than students maybe at more selective four-year schools. So I think I'd be looking closely at how the institution does that, and what are the markers that really show students have made that transformation. For example, very interested in court, of course, what does the first year experience look like and how students are experiencing their foundation, but then looking at like capstone projects and what kind of work are students doing as they complete their program. So I'd be very interested in looking at artifacts of student learning, particularly in the first year, and in terms of capstone projects, possibly something in the middle. I'd have to think that through, but those kinds of things I'd be looking at the institution's success in transformation from the student perspective. Now, how are these characteristics important to internal stakeholders? So, how is an institution's inclusivity? It's mostly undergraduate or very high undergraduate population. So, how is that important to internal stakeholders? And again, sort of as a third characteristic, the small size. So I'm thinking about how really the life of small institutions depends on their effectiveness, depends on their reputation. And we know that in the 21st century, particularly at the end of the second decade in the 21st century, that smaller colleges in some instances are having difficulty, particularly private ones. And in this case, incidentally, Bloomfield is private. As I said, Elizabeth City is a public school, and I think small public schools also are at risk. So first and foremost, this is all very important to internal stakeholders in the sense that the life of the institution is really at stake. Will the institution continue to exist? But I also think it's important to faculty, staff, and administrators, and really all who are working there, because an institution like Bloomfield, like Elizabeth City State, are very mission driven in the sense that everything that the institutions are doing are to help students realize their goals, and the bureaucracy is actually much thinner, and every decision counts so much more. I think that's an exciting place to be, and that those institutions are working in real ways every day to ensure their students are successful. So when those institutions are successful, students are successful. I know that's broadly true at any institution, but I think, again, it's particularly pointed when we're talking about small, inclusive institutions that are aiming for students to make the greatest transformation. So I think it could be pretty exciting to work at institutions like these. I also think, incidentally, that small colleges and their practices could be replicated at larger institutions to provide that same kind of experience for students, but in a larger system. So that's an aside, but something I also have my eye on. Particularly when there's lots of opportunities at larger institutions. But again, very interested in these smaller institutions. As a final note, I'll reference an idea from Powers and Slosh 2017, and the thing I want to mention there is the editor's discussion around quality indicators and the relationship between quality indicators and retention and graduation. So quality indicators like high school GPA, other factors that might suggest a student is well prepared for college, and how ultimately there's a direct relationship between those and student success in the end. And of course, I think all student success is fantastic, but I also think that sort of looking at that paradigm without a critical eye is concerning, in the sense that it potentially reinforces inequities that already exist. So an institution that has a great reputation because it does such good work, because it admits students who are quite prepared, again, fantastic, but expected. What about so many students who may be less well prepared for lots of different reasons, and how critically important it is that access to higher ed and success in higher ed is greater now than it's ever been? So much labor market research talks about the need for a college education for today's young people in a way that is more acute than it was, certainly when I was 18 and generations before that. So I think higher education professionals paying lots of attention to schools that aim to help students make the greatest transformation, I think that's incredibly exciting. And I think that when we look at something like the relationship between quality indicators and ultimate student success, we need to look at that with a very critical eye, and sort of be a part of this more idealized notion of what higher education could be. and that is real access and concrete success for greater numbers of people living in the U.S. So thanks very much, and I very much appreciated this assignment.